So, shall we get to it with pinks and purples? Which, the more I think about this, the weirder it gets because purple and pink don't technically exist in the sense of, they are not shades, they're not wavelengths of light. We do not have color receptors for them. Um, they're entirely our brain trying to make something up to deal with the random set of signals it is getting in. My purple is probably not your purple. Um, because it and because of that, we always read purples as being related to blue or related to red. It's very hard to get a purple that is that a red purple or is that a blue purple? Because in our brains, we're picking up blue signals and red signals and a bit of the other one in each case. It's quite hard to actually get exactly the same amount of both. Um, and the more you look at what purple is and what people have called purple over the years, the less sense it makes. Um, as an example, somebody's idea of what constitutes purple. Um, well, this particular version calls purple a shade of violet. Um, but there's some very, very different colours there, from almost burgundy, well, actual burgundy, all the way through to very pale pink. Um, I don't know if you looked on those, which one would you say? Yeah, that is essence of purple. What's as purple as you can get? I'm going to end up saying the word purple so many times it will cease to have meaning in a
I
few
think the
minutes.
grape.
Yeah, with grape. Yeah, yeah. That yeah, it's looking for that shade in the middle, isn't it? Which we don't think, yeah, but it's kind of really a sort of purpley blue, or it's kind of really a purpley pink.
Actually, no, grape might be too blue.
The one that they call electric violet, I would consider to be essence of purple. Second row down, fourth in.
Yeah, yeah. Be interesting to actually look at what the RB color balance is on these from which one is the closest to being half and half on the two. But yes, I think electric violet is, you can't say it's kind of maybe a bit pinker than it is blue, but the nature of purple is complicated, is my point. And particularly when you get into the actual word purple, which it starts off as porphyra, which actually has more to do with this color, because this is the color of porphyry, the stone. Um, and a lot of early references to purple are actually talking about more what we would call burgundy, um, or something similar. So yes, porphyra gives us the word purple. It gives us the burgundy stone, porphyry, this color, and of course it gives us porphyria, um, because the urine of a sufferer of porphyria is a sort of purpley red color. Um, and yeah, because it is initially used for this kind of set of colors, which are the colors that come from the murex shell, or various kinds of murex shell. Um, so yes, it's all a lot more red than we would think of as purple, um, at this point, and violet is blue purples are a completely different thing. Murex shells contain indigo. In nature, it is very difficult to actually get purple type colors. Um, that you can do it with certain minerals, or you can do it with very few actual dye chemicals. Indigo, as we think of it, is the color that creates blue jeans. Um, so we're thinking, okay, so now we've gone completely the other end. That's blue, right? um, but the indigo chemical comes in three sorts. There's actual indigo, which is blue, but usually in a plant or whatever. I've been learning chemistry this week too. There is also something called monobromo indigo, which is purple, and dibromo indigo, which is red, purple, burgundy colour. So, and different dye stuffs have a different balance between those three versions of indigo. So the plants, the indigo plant and the woad plant, notoriously, that's blue, because that's almost all straight indigo. Murex shells is a mixture of the three indigo varieties, So you get more of a mix depending on the exact species. But people have always, people get really confused about this. In the Bible, in the Hebrew version of the Bible, and a Jewish friend put me onto this one, there is a colour which in Hebrew is tekhelet, and it is usually taken to mean sky blue, even turquoisey blue. But in the Bible, it's just, that particular thing is tekhelet. They do not tell you, you have no context for it. So what actually is it? Later rabbinical sources say, oh, well, it's a thing that came from murex shells, at which point it's not sky blue anymore. I mean, at least on its way towards purple. Early sources translate it as hyacinth, which is that, at least when we've got a plant to reference, we can say, oh yeah, that's the colour of those flowers right there. That gets a bit easier. Some say it's the colour of the sky, others say it's the colour of the evening sky when it's, turning towards purple. It's very, very complicated. What we do know is the colour is being made at about 1500 BC, which is about the same date as the colour of murex purple develops in a little further along the coast in Lebanon. So it's probably the same thing. But then why do most people think it means sky blue? It's weird. So this is your murex shells. And this is usually known as Tyrian purple because it comes from around Tyre in Lebanon. And that is this version of it. But there are different versions of this right around the world, including one that is from near Cornwall, that apparently for a while people near Cornwall were able to make a nice purple dye this way. There's a lovely legend about how this purple was discovered, or the uses of the shell was discovered. There's a Phoenician legend that the god Melkart was walking the beach with his mistress and his dog. And his dog fished a shell out from the water and enthusiastically played with it and chewed it. And as this dog chewed it, of course, his mouth turned purple. And that inspired the god to use the snails to make a purple gown for his mistress and to teach the people of Tyre the secret of this particular dye. Of course, it's a lot more complicated to get out than just getting a dog to chew it for you, but it's a nice idea. And then in the Roman version of this, it's transferred to it being Hercules walking along the beach with his dog and his dog chewing on it. So either way, there is canine involvement. So this is Tyrian purple, also known as imperial purple. There are factories found, ruins are found now right along the Eastern Med, and you can tell where they are because there are mounds of murex shells, because you need a huge number of them. You can only harvest them in autumn and winter, and then you have to keep them alive in a pool for a certain length of time. Then you take the liquid and crush the shellfish, salt it, ferment it in wood ash and urine for 3 days, then simmer it in a vat for another 10 days. And this is happening in staggering quantities. They did a test quite recently that it took 12,000 shells to dye one handkerchief. Now, it may be that their technique was a bit more refined. They may have known some tricks that we don't know, but that gives you some sense of the scale of this. Pliny says that the smell is offensive, and I think that may be a magnificent understatement in this case. Imagine. Which means that even for emperors, this is used for borders and stripes. Nobody is making, 5 yards of the stuff, because that would be a whole country's, whole city's industry for the year. And yeah, this colour, we would look at it and we'd say, yeah, that's red, that is. That's a bunch of senators on a wall in Pompeii, with the stripes on their togas. It's not what we think at all. Under Nero, Any citizen who wore things made from Tyrian purple would be exiled or killed. This is just becomes the colour for the emperor and those he favours. One story is that Jesus was put in a robe with an imperial purple trim before the crucifixion, as a sort of mockery of the King of the Jews thing. It's a, only kings should be able to wear this stuff. And Diocletian says that patricians can wear purple, not just the emperor, but if they want to do so, they have to pay a hefty tax. It's said that Cleopatra's ship had purple sails, which again, you think of the quantity of shells required for that. If it is true, it is absolutely a statement piece. It might just be trimmings. Either way, apparently they were perfumed to mask the smell. Because this smell does not go away straight away. When you think of all those emperors and senators and so on, it may take some of the shine off to consider that they are basically going to smell of urine and fish, shells, because that lovely bright white linen is also going to come about by urine bleaching. And then, just add that little shellfish tang on the top. Lovely. I mean, they were used to it, I guess. But the Roman poet Martial actually notes that it retains a distinct, somewhat fishy smell even after it's been made into a garment. And he mentions a chap called Philonaeus who enjoys wearing the textile for its smell, not its colour. And how weird is he? Martial is a satirist, to be fair. This isn't necessarily a real person, but the concept has come into his head from somewhere. He also composes at one point a list of things that smell bad that I would, and the context again, Martial is just really mean, actually. He's a snarky kid. Things I would rather smell of than I would like to smell of that old woman Bassa. She smells so bad. I would rather smell of sulphurous waters, a fish pond, an amorous goat, the old shoes of a veteran soldier, the breath of a Jew who's been fasting, ointment made from Sabine oil, and fleece twice dipped in Tyrian purple. So, Martial, he's funny, but he's also awful. In the late Roman Empire, it was still restricted to the imperial family, and the purple dye workers had actually become their own separate labour caste of semi-slaves, and it's a hereditary position to be, your father was a purple dye worker, your grandfather was a purple dye worker, and it's all overseen by the state because obviously they're the only people using the colour anyway. And that association goes on into the Byzantine Empire, which of course is the survival of the Roman Empire in the eastern side of what was the original empire. And therefore Byzantine empresses give birth in what's called the Purple Chamber. And you'll sometimes see these rulers having Porphyrogenitus written after their name, and that means born to the purple, which is born to the throne, which is to say he actually got the position of emperor by being born to the previous, fathered by the previous emperor, rather than getting it by force. This does not happen very often in Byzantium, and when it does, I didn't take this by force, I was born to it. They actually add that to their name, and the way they do that is to say they are born to the purple. When in the Nika riots, when the empress it's suggested that she might have to go into exile and leave, she said, I would rather die in the purple than go somewhere else. It's this massive symbol. Again, the colour we are talking about, we can actually get... Those are emperors in their purple. And this is actually Murex dyed. It's the the far end of that. It's probably faded a bit towards the brown, but yeah, this is somebody really showing off their wealth, isn't it? Wearing that much of the stuff, so much of it that you could have it in folds and pleats. You're doing all right. Unfortunately, with the fall of Byzantium in 1453, the actual method of making it was lost. I suppose there would be a lot of people who knew their bit of the process, but not many people who knew the whole thing. So yes, the last proper Murex purple died out at about that time. And weirdly, at about the same time, for no obvious reason, it also sort of stops being done in Cornwall as well. Possibly just the amount of effort involved, I don't know. There's a papal decree in 1464, so 11 years after the fall of Byzantium, where the Pope says cardinals in the clergy will now wear scarlet that comes from Kermes insects, not Murex purple. And that's of course because they just can't find the fabric anymore to do it the other way. One version of this I was reading said, Mankind's loss was undoubtedly Murex's gain, and no doubt there was some serious rejoicing amongst the small number of Murex who still remained. They're not hunting us anymore. And there's a few examples after that of people, looks like they're trying to recreate it, but it wasn't properly recreated until the 90s, I think 1990s, and even then we're not entirely sure it's quite the same. And there are a few people who are allowed to do it, particularly since the Murex remains endangered anyway, as do its various analogues around the world. And given how many it needs to do any, you will find very, very little modern stuff dyed with Murex. Meanwhile, in Japan, they're doing something completely different. They found a plant called the purple gromwell to do it. Which the interesting thing about that is that their word for that is Murasaki, and Murasaki is also the name of a really important writer of the time. She writes the Tale of Genji, which is by some measures the first novel, except it's too long. It's basically a sort of heroic soap opera about this Genji chap, and yeah, it's really, I've read extracts from it, it's really good fun. And yes, her nickname is the plant that gives the colour purple. And there are other options. Polynesia has found a seashell, a sea urchin that does the same job as the shell, similar chemicals and so on. But yeah, your easy version kind of goes away for a while. You can still make it as a fabric by over dyeing, but that's really expensive, and that means that it is still something for the upper classes. It's, oh, somebody's got an echo. Can we? No. It's less prestigious in the 16th century than bright red, but it is still considered to be a colour only for important people. Henry VIII passes various sort of sumptuary laws defining which people can wear which colours, and he says that you have to have the king's consent to wear purple. In 1548, he gives the Earl of Surrey, Henry Howard, a purple jacket. So he's allowed to have the jacket. It would appear that Henry takes offence when he goes one further and wears this jacket with lots of sort of royal type trappings and showing himself to be terribly, terribly important. And when he was tried and killed for high treason, one of the charges against him was that he was dressing like a king, and maybe that purple jacket had given him ideas above his station, that he had the right to go around like he was a king. And this is one of the things that was brought as evidence against that. You can't tell it now, but as it has at the bottom there, they found ways recently of analysing old paint for the colours that you would need to mix to make up a good pigment purple. You have to mix smalt and common lake. Smalt being a mineral, not in fact the small fish, because putting a smalt in a common lake, crimson lake, would be something completely different. So yeah, apparently those pigments are to be found in here. Both of those colours fade very badly. So a lot of things that are that look brown apparently might have been purple in early modern portraits. And so yes, this is actually him in bright purple. We can see this better in this one. So this, what a lovely white and gold thing. They've analysed the pigment in that there and discovered that actually it contains large quantities of very faded remnants of smalt and crimson lake, which rather implies, and I don't think this is 100% agreed amongst art historians, but it is possible that this would once have been that colour, which is a massive difference, isn't it? And would look very because with nice subtle matching her complexion and her hair and so on. That's a very different statement. And it was still a very royal thing. Mary I has a purple gown for her coronation. It said, she rode through the city of London in a gown of purple velvet, furred with powdered ermine, with her head a caul of cloth of tinsel, beset with pearl and stone. Tinsel clearly does not quite mean what it means now, but I'd love to imagine Mary going through town in a crown of tinsel, like a 5-year-old who's been at the Christmas decorations. And yeah, Elizabeth, for the banquet after her coronation, did so. And these would be done with lots of over-dyeing of a red and a blue dye, because that was all you could get hold of. In theory, you can sort of do it with bilberry and similar, but it's not very colour fast. There is another option you can take through all of this, which again is like, is this a purple? Is this a pink? This is why I'm going to have to do pink and purple at the same time, because it gets really messy. Which is to use various lichens, or lichens, depending on your preference. Apparently they're both equally valid, I checked. And that again goes back to prehistory. There are again several different lichens that can do the job. Something called orchil in the South Mediterranean, which all have similar chemicals. Again, it's a lovely smelly thing involving lots of urine or other sources of ammonia, such that people actually try mixing their murex and their lichen, or faking the one with the other, trying to defraud people by saying, oh, this is a shellfish dyed thing, when it's not. It's a lichen dyed one. But the lichen dye does fade much more quickly, so it is the cheaper option. But another thing you can do with all of these is dye leather, and leather of this colour in medieval times is very much associated with a whole acceptance of the papal church way of doing things. So if you have something that's in that colour rather than other colours in this country, that's saying that you look towards the church in Rome rather than the Celtic church at the time when the two are not talking to each other particularly well. There are sort of markers of which one you follow. What's your hairstyle as a monk? What day do you celebrate Easter? And are you using this in your manuscripts? And again, should be made from murex. That one isn't. That one's made from lichen because somebody's trying to fake it the easy way. But yes, as you see, this is what they would call a purple. But if you re-dye it and use the same dye batch, you're very soon into a pink. It's a mess. The dye used in these would in medieval times have been called, or rather once you got it into a dye stuff, it would have been called litmus. Litmus means dye moss. and that colour in it is the chemical that is used in litmus strips because it reacts to acid. It's the same thing you get in red cabbage. It's how you can use red cabbage for litmus acid purposes. So the litmus test is the dye Moss test, and that's how, among other things, how you can tell whether you're using the right kind of dye. But yeah, they worked out that you could use that particular dye stuff for acid spotting, and the first acid test strips are made using the actual lichen, and that's in 1803. Someone starts doing that. This lovely colour is called Cudbear. One of those colours you never knew existed and never knew had a proper name. This is Cudbear. And it's one of the first sort of dyes to be invented in modern times. And it's sort of based on a natural dye, but the process has been improved. And one of the few dyes to be credited to a named individual. Now, it starts with George Gordon, who's a coppersmith, and he's repairing an old copper boiler in a London dye house, where they are trying to make a red-purple dye from a Mediterranean lichen. And he looks at what they're doing, and it reminds him vaguely of the way his grandmother used to make dyes back in the Highlands from the lichen that was scraped off the rocks up there. And this is in, mid 18th century, so he's thinking back to before the Highland clearances. He's thinking back to the kind of old Highland way of life. His old gran used to have these methods for making a very nice purple dye from lichen, and he looked at the way they were doing things and thought, yeah, I'm sure this could be done better, actually. Also, wouldn't it be great to be able to use something native rather than having to import all of this lichen from the south of Europe? Plus, it'll be cheaper. So he goes back home to Scotland and talks to his nephew, Cuthbert Gordon, who is a chemist. And Cuthbert starts experimenting, and they come up with this new method of getting a much better dye out of the available Scottish lichens, and they call it Cudbear, after Cuthbert, because of course the northern and Scottish version of Cuthbert is Cuddy. Hence eider ducks are called Cuddy ducks up here, because they're Cuthbert's ducks. So yes, it is Cudbear. So he patents it 1758. His attempt to actually make something commercially profitable are mixed results, but it does, he gets the process started, and then he attracts the attention of, my mouse is failing to work. A chap called John Glassford looks at it and thinks, oh, that's great, I'll invest a whole load of my funds. He's previously a tobacco grower, slave heavy business, and establishes a big dye works in Denniston in 1777. The manufacture details are incredibly closely preserved, possibly because it's not actually that hard to do and they don't want people to know that. There is a 10-foot high wall all the way around the facility. All of the staff are sworn to secrecy and are all native Gaelic speakers who can't tell anyone who isn't. The consumption of lichen by that one plant alone reaches 250 tons a year, so much so that they have to actually start importing from Norway and Sweden, thus messing up that whole let's get a local product in the first place. The person in charge of that factory is George Mackintosh, the father of Charles Mackintosh, of Macintosh fame. Yeah, they have to get several sources. Eventually they even have to start getting things from the Canary Islands, which again, rather defeating the point. It gets harder to get things in from a long way as political winds change. But nonetheless, having brought the Murex to a point of being quite badly endangered. There were some lichens that were really starting to struggle, and it was only the synthesis of Movene, which we'll come to in 1856, that then the demand for the lichen drops. But you could still buy lichen-based fabric into the 20th century. Wood and Bedford, later the Yorkshire Dyeware and Chemical Company, were producing Orchil lichen fabric into the 1920s. There was another sort of improved lichen version developed in France. You still have to put it in ammonia and then acidify it and then boil it and so on. Then put it in ammonia again, then heat it in the air, then precipitate it with calcium chloride. You start getting something which is much more dye-fast than the previous versions. It's known as French purple. Unfortunately, at exactly the same year as French purple is patented, so too is the cheap and easy artificial version of the same. But in the meanwhile, it has been popular amongst, so these will be wearing Cudbear or other lichen versions. Nice bit of lilac, possibly even in her hair as well. That was a thing, pink and purple talc in your hair for wig powder. Then along comes this stuff, which is still pretty much the colour it started life. It is vibrant, and this is the colour I think that a lot of people think of as being purest purple. It's not red, it's not blue, it's purple, and that's why it catches the eye as much as it does. And making something that bright and that purple wasn't, well, it was possible. It was very, very difficult before this point. The story of how it comes about is quite good. 18-year-old chemistry student William Henry Perkin is he's working part-time while he's doing his chemistry studies. He's working part-time as a research assistant for August Hofmann, who is trying to synthesize quinine. And they've worked out that there's this coal tar stuff. Coal tar is being produced as a byproduct of them making loads of coal gas and loads of coke. They're left with this black sticky gunk. People really want to find a use for it because it's a waste product otherwise, and in any case they're pretty sure it contains a whole load of interesting chemicals, which it does. So they're trying to find ways to use coal tar to make things, and Hofmann is convinced that you can make quinine from it. I'm not sure if that's true, but Perkin wants to have a go. Hoffman is actually away on holiday, so Perkin can't go into work, so he goes up to his home lab in his own in the attic of his parents' house, and there he continues tinkering on the Easter break. You'd think he'd find something different to do with his life at this point, but you know. His method is utterly wrong for any attempt to try and make quinine. He's just messing around, trying things, and he ends up where, you know, there's coal tar, hydrogen and oxygen coming off, and this kind of black sludge has been left behind, which is clearly no use to anything. As he wipes it off the table, presumably, or the glass, with alcohol just to get clean, it leaves a colour behind. He says a strangely beautiful colour is produced, and he's developed Movene, or what later becomes called Movene. It's the first aniline dye, and that aniline's to do with the process of creating the dye from the original sludge. You know, in a world of relatively muted fabrics, this colour stands out. And this is, you know, this is in competition with arsenic green. So imagine if you had both in the same room. Hofmann was not in favour of things being used for industry. He was a pure chemist. Nothing else was his concern. So he said that Perkins, well done, Perkins, you have discovered purple sludge. It's like purest green, you know. You have discovered purple sludge. Well done. You know that if you pursue industry, you will never be able to return to pure chemistry proper. That will be a waste of your life. you should remain in chemistry and get better at it. Perkin ignores this, but yes, Hoffman was very much about, to be fair, he thought scientists should share everything with all of mankind. He was not in favour of patents and profits. But Perkin disagreed. He's 18. He knows that he can make this bright purple. He knows absolutely nothing about the dye industry and very little about running a business, unfortunately. But he's going to give it a go anyway. His original version also has a problem that it will only dye silk and wool, not cotton. And it takes them a while to work out, to get it to stick to cotton. You need to add some tannins into the mix. And it is expensive. But the results, this bright shade here, you can't beat that with modern chemicals, can you, for vibrancy? So originally he markets it as Tyrian purple, because it's, weirdly not anything like the colour of the Roman Tyrian purple, but he doesn't know that. He assumes that Imperial Tyrian purple was an actual purple, and therefore this would be the same. Then he discovers that in France, people are, there's a bit of a fashion for a sort of pinky purple thing you can see on the right there, that comes from the mallow flower. And in French, that colour is called mauve, because the mallow flower is called a mauve in French. And this colour was becoming very popular in France. There's actually a couple of references to dresses where we don't know whether it's somebody using the new French but natural, or the really bright Perkins saturated colour. For instance, Empress Eugénie of France wears something that's described as mauve, and yeah, it's not clear whether it's the old colour or the new colour. Either way, she loves the colour because she says it matches her eyes. Either of those is a slightly disturbing eye colour, and in fact it's not really possible for your eyes to be full on purple. We don't have the pigments for that. But similarly, Queen Victoria, on the wedding of her daughter in 1856, wears a dress of rich mauve velvet, trimmed with 3 rows in lace, the petticoat, mauve and silver moire antique. We don't know whether that mauve is this lovely, soft mallow flower thing, or if she is an early adopter of this new thing here, because very quickly Perkin realizes, okay, calling this Tyrian isn't working. There's this fashionable new mauve thing. I'm going to call my product Mauvine, which I think technically it would be Mauvine, because it's combining mauve with aniline, as in an aniline dye, but it looks like Mauvine. I think everyone calls it Mauvine. And this is really fashionable. This is one newspaper. It's not so much fashionable as people go a bit nuts for it, and that's what I always love in history, when people, fads for things. One newspaper says it's rich and pure and fit for anything, be it fan, slipper, gown, ribbon, handkerchief, tie or glove. It will lend lustrous to the soft, changeless twilight of ladies' eyes. I wasn't aware that the soft, lustrous twilight of my eyes needed extra luster, but that's a thing. The same article says that Mr. Perkin can itinerate Regent Street and perambulate the parks, seeing the colours of thy heart waving on every fair head and fluttering around every cheek. A lot of bonnets going on. Dickens in 1859, so we're still only a few years after the invention of the colour. Dickens, in his literary magazine All Year Round, writes, "As I look out my window, purple striped gowns throng streamers, fill railway stations, all flying countryward like so many purple birds of migrating paradise. Purple ribbons fill the windows. Purple feather fans bedeck you in windows. We shall soon have purple omnibuses and purple houses. Punch, of course, takes things one little step further even than that. Punch is source for this period. And Punch describes there is this terrible, strange new illness amongst women. It's rapidly spreading. It's highly infectious. It seems to affect the mind, but is most noticeable in its effect upon the body of the woman. Dr. Punch is of the opinion that it is not so much a mania as a species of measles. It declares itself in a measly rash of ribbons about the head and neck of the person who has caught it. This eruption, which is of a mauve colour, soon spreads until in some cases the sufferer becomes completely covered with it. Mauve measles. It starts spreading into wallpaper, which, frankly, if the alternative is arsenic green, I think that's a good thing. Book covers, and of course in 1881 it gets its own stamp, which is confusingly known as the penny lilac. That's not lilac. It's barely even mauvine, but it is actually made with some mauvine in the mix. But yes, just to further confuse what colour is what. Recently somebody analysed 15 different mauvine penny lilacs and other stamps from the era, and found that there are lots of actual subtly different chemicals involved. It suggests that there was quite a lot of tinkering, and each factory was doing something very slightly different for one reason or another. So yeah, a lot of these early artificial dyes done with this process, they're made using aniline, which is aminobenzene, and they make wonderful dyes. They make lousy pigment. You can't paint with them. They generally, everything goes into a very murky brown if you try. James Whistler, discovering this while trying to paint with aniline dyes, decides to call them aniline with an A, on the basis of the murky browns produced. So in art, you have to use different things. So cobalt violet, for instance, which is highly toxic, because of course it is. No, it's surprising that any painter made it past the age of about 25, given all the things that they're on their brushes at this date. And then there is something called Nuremberg violet in 1866. Monet says of this pigment, "I have finally discovered the true colour of the atmosphere. It's violet. Fresh air is violet. 3 years from now, everyone will work in violet." So that revolutionizes painting by giving you an actual option of a presumably blue side of purple. Lilac and mauve are allowed within your half mourning, which means they become quite popular amongst Victorian ladies, because obviously after you've spent a certain amount of time wearing just black for the death of your husband, you're allowed to sparkle it up a bit, and Victoria obviously doesn't, but lilac is the next colour after grey, I think, that you're allowed to bring in to your wardrobe. So there are quite a few people doing that, shades of purple, but it's still supposed to be partly black, so you get a lot of black and purple mixed dresses. Now, people also are reusing their dresses. So instead of buying something sort of new and fancy with soft lavender elements, if you can't afford to do that, but you're trying to do mourning, you'll move into your purple dress. And obviously, you don't want to necessarily stop wearing it once you've stopped being in mourning, so you keep wearing those dresses. By 1890, this shade of mauve is associated with women trying to deny their age. I definitely should be wearing that. In the picture of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde says, "Never trust a woman who wears mauve, whatever her age may be, or a woman over 35 who is fond of pink ribbons. It means they have a history. Marvellous, isn't it? I want to go and get some pink ribbons immediately. And yeah, obviously there are a lot of things going on in the 20th century as well, getting into more proper modern fashion history at that point, and history of sort of fashion icons, which is a different area rather than being my thing. But I will just add on purple one final little tweak there that, as the Guardian puts it, and apologies to anyone of a different political persuasion, then UKIP got hold of it. Purple has survived for centuries, has been the most legislated colour in history, has sent men to their deaths, and yet still causes most people to smile when they look at it. But this may be the biggest threat purple has ever faced. Which is rather brilliant. Okay, I think if people need to stop for a quick drink, now is the good time, because we will move from purple to pink in a moment. So this would be the moment to do it. Although, as you've already seen, the dividing line is just non-existent. I shall put more gin in this. No, wait, the other thing.
20 years ago, Joe.
Yes, that would be about right. Okay.
Is that right, D&H? Was it 70 years ago?
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. 1953. Yes.
Yeah.
We were there. Not
exactly
not
there.
together. Either.
Not exactly there. Either.
Many miles apart.
Somehow I got left off the invitation list. Can't understand why.
14-year-old lads are not what you need.
As I was not this time either. It's all a bit,
A bit remote.
a bit disappointing.
Well, an Indian Muslim charity worker 3 streets from me got an invitation. So obviously the invites were going out a bit wider this time.
Yeah.
There was a big representation from other colour and other nationality, other ethnic backgrounds. I think that was really good.
Yeah.
And the Black Gospel Choir.
And Nick Cave, which makes no sense to me at all. Anyway. Okay, so as with all colours, and we're sort of back to the beginning here, pink is a construct. Pink does not really exist. We say, yeah, we're going to call that and that pink, but not that and not that. But it's all artificial. One thing that makes that very, very clear is that Russian has no word pink. What it does have is a separate word for pale blue. And you would not call a pale blue thing by the dark blue word, and vice versa, any more than we would look at something bright red and a pillar box and say it's pink, or a Barbie was red. They are different colours for them. But when it comes to shades of red and pink, in Russia there is only one word. And for blue there is 2. So it just shows how abstract and artificial the whole thing is, really. It takes a bit of getting your head around that. Now,
The red square now appears in my mind in a totally different way. It could in fact be pink.
that is true. Yes. Their colour could incorporate red and pink. So yes, it could be the pink square. I like that. The word pink is also one of the last 2 kind of main big colour words to come into the English language. The other one that is relatively late in the day is orange, which is of course why we have red heads and robin redbreasts and red kites and so on when they're actually orange. We didn't have a word for that, so just used red. Similarly, there was no word, well, the word pink was not in use until the 17th century. And different sources suggest different exact first uses. Before that, you might refer back to different flowers. You might do what the ancient Greeks and Romans do and talk about something being rosy in colour. it's often used to describe the dawn, which again isn't actually pink, but that's complicating things further. Olga will correct me if I'm wrong, but in German, rosa is pink, and pink as a word means bright, shocking pink. All other pinks are rosy.
Joe, I promise this will be my last digression. When did orange come in?
16th, 17th century.
Because I'm thinking of William of Orange.
Oh, he's 1688. It's definitely in by then, but that's
okay. Wow.
And of course, he's named for the place, which it's actually coincidence.
Okay, Oranjeboom.
Yeah, rather than from the naranj, which is the fruit that comes in, and then for a while it's people talk about red yellow or yellow red, or occasionally quince coloured or some other thing, and then eventually they settle on the colour of an orange, and that becomes the colour. But yes, William of Orange is 1688, so it's been around as a colour for about 100 years by that point.
Thank you.
So you might say rosy, or you might say that something is incarnadine or incarnate. Now, for us, incarnadine is bright red because it's to do with the colour of blood. But for them, incarnadine, it's to do with the flesh. That's why incarnate is, made in the flesh. So incarnadine was originally Caucasian flesh coloured, aka you can use it for pink, and that gradually shifts in meaning from the colour of this person's flesh to the universal colour of what's underneath everybody's flesh, which is to say bright red. Lady Macbeth is the first person to use it as a verb to make something red, to make the multitudinous seas incarnadine with blood. And yeah, just a couple of generations earlier, that would have been, you're going to make it pink? What? And of course, it also connects to carnations, which are called carnations because they are the colour of Caucasian flesh, i.e. pink. And carnations and pinks are related as flowers. So it all goes around. So yes, carnation was actually used as a colour before pink was. Because carnation has the benefits of connecting both to the pink flower and to incarnadine flesh. And dianthus flowers are first called pinks in the 1560s. And so this flower gains that name in the 1560s. We're not quite sure why. It could be from the Dutch word pink, which is something small or narrow. This is why this is your pinky finger, even though it's no pinker than your other fingers. It's because it's your little finger. It's small and narrow, like the Dutch pink. Or it might be to do with the verb to pink, which goes back to Norman times and is related to words like prick and pierce, and is what pinking shears do. Pinking shears do not turn something pink, but they do give them a zigzag edge, which when you look at the edges of these flowers, of course, makes sense. So if those look like they've been got with pinking shears, then they are clearly pinks. And then from there, it moves from that to the colour pink. Before that, yes, things were just rosy or incarnadine or just pale red, like it is if you are Russian. And to add to our linguistic confusion even more, at the same time as pink is starting to become a colour in English after that flower, literally the same time, there is a colour which is pinky, Pinke. First reference 1598. It's a yellowy green. Really. It's also known as Stildegrain yellow. It comes from buckthorn. And as the other our pink becomes more popular as a word and starts displacing this yellow pink, people start calling it yellow pink, because that helps, or occasionally calling it, in different times and places, this yellow colour is known as Dutch pink, English pink, Italian pink, and French pink, because that helps. Yeah. I couldn't, nobody seems to know why that other colour was called pink, and whether the two are connected and there was a terrible mistake somewhere along the way. But that's what happened. Fortunately, that one died down, because otherwise we would be in a terrible situation of having two completely different colours with the same name. But very confusing when you're talking to your interior decorator. I want all this wall painted a lovely soft pink. You did what to it? So, unlike your sort of richer purples, it is relatively easy to make various shades of pink with plants. In the West here, madder will give you sort of salmony pinks quite easily, orangey pinks quite easily. Further in the East, in China, you get things made from safflower, which they use not only for their robes but also for blusher. Quite nice. And there's also something called Brazil wood, which exists in India originally. Now, Brazil wood in India, you're thinking? Yeah. It was being used, it had been discovered and was quite exciting, this new shade from India in 1500, at the time when the Portuguese travelled to South America and discovered a different species of clearly the same sort of tree, which gave a similar, perhaps even nicer shade of red-pink colour. So they called this the Brazil wood land. The country is named for the wood, not the other way round. So Brazil is named for an Indian plant. Isn't that great? Because Brazil wood, because it was a more colour-fast version, everyone wanted it. So it was one of the drivers, along with the other things, you know, the great treasures of South America that were touted, the gold and so on, was one of the drivers that led so many different countries to all try and stake a little foothold around the coast. And the one that the Portuguese had grabbed, well, that was Brazil wood land, wasn't it? So Brazil. So these are some of those.
Oh, incongruous naming, Joe.
Yep.
Turkey is named after a South American bird.
Mm. Yes, I mean the bird, the turkey, is hilarious. I don't know where the country is named.
No, that's actually not true. But we didn't know where it had come from, and we really liked them, and we thought, well, lots of good things come from the Ottoman Empire.
It must be one of those.
Let's call it a turkey.
It's brought over by Turkey merchants.
And now they've changed the name in English. They would like us to call the country Turkia.
Ah, okay. Which is how you say it in their own language, I suppose. Yes. Yeah. And meanwhile, of course, the turkey in France is cochon d'Inde, which is the Indian chicken.
Gosh, yes.
They came from India. And in Turkey, they say they call it an Indian something. And in India, they call it a Malaysian something, and it kind of goes roundabout. No, it's always like a thing from somewhere else, and usually not from the right place. Because, of course, actually, they're all talking about a completely different bird anyway. They're talking about Madagascan guinea fowl, something like that. So yes, that is a brilliant one. Place names can be weird. So yeah, here these are, I believe that is safflower, the Chinese version of it. That is sapan, which is the Indian Brazil wood, and that is the South American Brazil wood, although you can also get those sort of bright colours from it as well, otherwise it wouldn't have been so sought after. As soon as you look for, okay, I want to see samples of what color this dyes, you will for every instance be shown on Google everything from the brightest magenta to the palest color, because it depends on what mordants you use and what strength you've got it at and exact what subspecies it is. And basically all of these colors can, in the right conditions, give more or less any shade of pink you like. But because these brighter pinks were coming in from India and from China and increasingly from Brazil, it was seen as being very exotic. Bright pink was an exotic thing. It ends up being given names like China pink, Congo pink, had its brief moment in the sun, Persian pink. Weirdly, that's true elsewhere as well. There's a 17th century Chinese word for pink, which is literally foreign color. So there must have been a dye stuff. Possibly it's the Indian sapan coming in to China that is foreign color. And of course, we have always given interesting names to different shades of these things. In Tudor times, one particular shade of light pink is called lusty gallant. There's someone who should be, naming lipstick shades in the modern world, I think. A bit of lusty gallant, that particular shade of pink.
Or which century was that?
Lusty
Sheriff?
gallant. Lusty gallant is sort of 1600 or so.
Oh, because a little later than that, we straight men were wearing makeup quite cheerfully.
Well, I'm back then. Well, not then. Like 1780, straight men were wearing makeup quite cheerfully. The ability of men to wear makeup comes and goes over the generations. I think it's probably due a revival about now.
You should so publish on that topic, Joe.
The goth guys.
I would buy that book. I would buy that book.
Yeah, we know quite a few goths and genderqueer folk anyway, so yeah, just wear what they want, really. In the 18th century, pink was very much thought to be a useful colour, and probably unsuitable for anybody above about 30. Anyone above about 30 doing it is just false advertising and being ridiculous. And it's a great disappointment if you think you're expecting, you see this dress and across the room, and then she turns around and she's some old hag of 32. Then you're within your rights to be disappointed by this. There's a play which is all about old age hanging out with folly, and it's really what's the word? It's all allegorical. All of the characters are things like pleasure and lechery and old
Spite.
age. Yes, they're all
envy.
Yes, they're all things like that. And old age is hanging out with folly because she wants to be able to spend time with beauty again, but beauty has gone off with somebody else. And it's really heavy-handed, but it's a play from 1740s. And I mention this because the play was the basis for this picture, which is Folly embellishing old age with the adornments of youth. So this is 1740s, and she's supposed to look ridiculous because she has got blusher on and doing all her hair in the big fancy styles, and also because she is wearing soft pink, which is not an appropriate colour for the older lady.
She's got a nice castle, though.
Well, yeah, if you live somewhere like that, I would say you don't really care what other people think, do you? You think I'm wearing these clothes? Well, you don't have anywhere to live nearly as nice as I do, so nice bit of soft mauve going on this side as well. A little later than that, this kind of idea, because the 18th century is very big into its, or certainly late 18th century is very into its pastel shades and its soft shades. This is before those really bright, vivid purples and greens. this, you know, you got your soft blue and your soft green, and it's all in that picture really. And nobody is going to do this more, of course, than Madame de Pompadour, who is absolute fashionista of her day. And she's 1750s, 1760s, and she loves her pink. So much that she has her own sort of signature colour, signature shade of pink, which is known as Rose Pompadour. And of course, remember, rose is French for pink. So, and she wears it so often that this porcelain factory actually starts making goods in Pompadour pink. This is a surviving set of Pompadour pink serving bowls and things. And yes, she chooses this. This is her. I've cut it off because I couldn't find one that showed all of this bit nicely enough without also cutting off her face. But not only on this, but also in her little cameo there, and she's doing her cheeks in the same colour. Yeah, she has a porcelain factory to make it up, and on the basis of this, the king allows the Sèvres porcelain factory to be known as a royal factory. It is by royal command, even though she is the mistress, not actual royalty, which isn't bad, is it? There's a story that she commissions Sèvres factory to make her an interior garden made entirely of porcelain flowers, with all of these pink roses made from this particular shade of porcelain. And the King Louis XV, came into the room, and it said he was amazed and amused, and even more so when he went to pick a flower to find that it was made of this Sèvres porcelain. I kind of figure he did work that out before, but you know, it would be fun to pretend, wouldn't it? Like, what is this I have here? Or unless he really was so inbred as to not work that one out, I don't know.
I'm irresistibly reminded of the Edith Piaf song, La Vie en Rose.
Yes, that's
obviously that word has some rich connotations in French.
Yes, and it is very much a colour of the pre-revolutionary, this kind of, along with the big wigs, which again were sometimes powdered pink.
Yes.
It's definitely a colour of that era, and Madame de Pompadour is where that starts, really. Meanwhile, well, I say meanwhile, 100 years later, it's all bits and bobs. Very soon after, oh no, that's another one following that trend. So she's sort of 1800 or so, when these sort of soft pinks are very in for portraiture. Quite a lot of portraits. There's the one of a lady on a swing kicking her legs up, which is also in a lovely shade of pink that's become very famous. But yes, these pastels were what it was all about at that time. Then suddenly, from that kind of thing into the world comes this. So this is only a couple of years after Mauveine. This is, people have worked out, oh, we can make these bright coloured dyes out of coal tar. What else can we do if we mix coal tar with some other chemicals before we put it through this process? So it's another aniline dye, which is made with coal tar, aniline, and tin chloride. Now he names this colour fuchsine, after the colour of fuchsia, which is about right, isn't it? But very soon after that, in Britain, we're paying close attention for various reasons to the Second Italian War of Independence, and within that war there are two big battles: Solferino and Magenta. Magenta is a place in Italy, and so is Solferino, and we're not really sure why, but for some reason this colour, which reached England at the same time as news of the battles did, and maybe that's reason enough, this colour became known as Solferino and also as Magenta. So that's why this colour is called Magenta. and the word was sort of cropping up all over the place because everyone was talking about it. So yeah, who knows? We are, of course, as I say, also in this era of arsenic green, and one German chemist tested fabrics dyed with magenta in the 1870s and found that these also contained traces of arsenic. I'm not sure it was necessary for the manufacturing process, but possibly it makes it more colour fast or something. Possibly it's just there's so much loose arsenic flying around in dyers' works that it gets onto everything. But yes, there are increasing reports that however this was made, it is also causing skin conditions as the dye leaks out when you sweat on it. It is causing rashes and irritation. Yes, when it gets rained on, it will have the same effect. So again, wouldn't recommend actually going back in time wearing this one. I think you're all right with the original Moveen, although I'd stick to Cudbear really. Perkin sees that this is happening, and having had the one great success, tries to make his own version of this colour to compete with this, because obviously this is in quite close competition with his Moveen colour. He tries to make his own, and his approach to using that is not tin chloride, it's mercuric nitrate. And so the next thing you know, everybody's getting mercury poisoning from wearing these things, which isn't exactly better. It was said at the time he had a factory on the Grand Junction Canal, and it was reported that the water of the Grand Junction Canal changed colour on a regular basis as he tried different things and put different things into production. The water was often interesting shades of pink and purple. And there was a fad for using this colour for men's socks. But again, if you're going to put something somewhere which is likely to get sweaty and likely to retain its sweat in close proximity to the feet, and it contains nasty chemicals, yeah, it's not a good idea. A lot of people got red, inflamed, sore feet from it, and the sort of toxicity began to give this kind of colour a bad name. And as with the green, it sort of had its time. About the same time as that was being figured out, I've skipped a picture out. I was going to give you a picture there of Jaipur in India, because if we're thinking pink, do you know that the city of Jaipur it's known as the Pink City, and that's because in 1876 the Crown Prince, the future king, the future Edward, the Edwardian era, visited the area, and I shall bring up an example if you. And the local Maharaja decided he was going to impress the future king by painting all of the buildings pink, and most of them still are. And obviously, it's because pink in India was a color of hospitality. So, in order to make the king feel welcome, he just said, all the buildings in the whole of the city centre, they're going to be pink now. And this being a kind of earthy, orangey pink, it's relatively easy to do with mineral pigment, so there wasn't an issue on that. And yeah, because it started attracting tourists, they've kept it like that ever since, and it does still attract tourists, and it's rather dramatic, isn't it? So that's a very different take on pinkness going on there. As for the idea of what colour is for which gender, for a long time, of course, historically, boys and girls are going to wear exactly the same stuff anyway, because for a long time, until you're about 6, you're just going to wear a smock, because it's easy to clean, hygienic, before your child is potty trained. And generally that's just going to be white, because you can bleach it. If it was a colour, then you're going to have to, that colour is going to start fading pretty quickly. But if you make it white, you can pretend that's deliberate and bleach it to hell. So mid-19th century, you start seeing colour on children. And originally it's pretty much any colour either way, doesn't really matter. And that's the case until the late 19th century. And you can definitely find these examples of little boys in pink and little girls in blue, like those ones. In the 1890s, there seems to be a sort of colour patterning that generally pink is for boys and blue is for girls. Now, this was a sort of relatively recent discovery that a historian figured this out, and it can be overstated. It wasn't anywhere near as kind of colour differentiated as it is in the modern world. There were some magazines absolutely saying it the other way around, but more often than not, any kind of clothing catalogue, department store catalogue, homemaking magazine, more often than not in sort of 1900 would tell you that it is that way around, that it is pink for boys and blue for girls.
It must be true, miss, because Stephen Fry said it on QI.
Oh, do you know the number of things on QI Stephen Fry said that aren't true?
Oh, please, anytime.
I mean, there are some. And they do admit that, to be honest, when they come back to things. But yes, there have been a few that I've gone, not really.
Oh, I'm Googling it right after this class.
So yeah, this was a trend. So it wasn't anything like a modern exaggerated form of that, but it was a trend. Earnshaw Infants Department Superstore magazine in 1918 explains why. It says the generally accepted rule is pink for boys and blue for the girls. The reason is that pink, being a more decided and stronger colour, is more suitable for the boy, while blue, which is more delicate and dainty, is prettier for the girl. The thing is, red was seen as a very, very masculine colour. Red is all male, and therefore pink is just a softer, gentler version of red, and therefore the person who should be wearing that is a boy. And meanwhile, blue is seen as this delicate shade, and it doesn't hurt that blue, of course, as in dresses, has strong associations with the Virgin Mary. So it is a colour for women, and therefore a light blue. I realise if I put that on, I might get a bit more. A bit more on my face, where I'm kind of in and out of that shade line there. So yeah, there are other sources that said the opposite, but it definitely was a thing. I actually did an oral history many years ago with a lady who was born in like 1910 or something like that. She's very old by the time I was speaking to her, but she said that when she was born, her mother had decorated up the room with lots and lots of pink ribbons in the hope of getting a boy, and was then disappointed to get a girl, and that she should have done the place up with blue ribbons. So, you know, it's not that long ago, really. It's not that far beyond sort of memory. And it doesn't completely flip until like the 1930s. It starts being the other way around. And it happens in other cultures as well. Contemporary Japanese culture, pink is seen as masculine. It's seen as somewhat mournful. It's supposed to, it represents, so blood is a man in the full of his health, but pink in Japanese culture represents, or one of its meanings is a sort of a young warrior who fell in battle. So he has lost that bright red and it's faded out to pink, which is sort of weird. but again, what they mean by pink, you can. So it's just started graupling.
Yeah, I can hear the grapple from here.
I've tried to bring that word back into use. It's a good word.
Oh, could you help me with it then? Because I've never heard it before.
For a culture that has so much different snow going on, we have lost some of our good words for different kinds of snow. Graupel is a proper Old English word or Middle English word for when it's falling and it's frozen, but it's not snowflakes, it's little tiny lumps. But they're not hailstones. Hailstones are proper round balls. It's like it's falling in little polystyrene beads type stuff. That stuff is called graupel. And I feel it's something we should have a word for because it happens so often, sometimes in the middle of May.
Yeah, I was just going, what on earth is that noise, as he started hoovering or something, and then realised it was the graupel.
Might be going down to just rain now, but it definitely was graupel for a minute. There you go, new word for you. Next time you see that stuff, graupel. I'm not sure if it was ever used as a verb or if I'm just doing that, but we know that's how English works these days. You can verb more or less anything, including verb. So yes, that is a long way away from, of course, the modern what has happened with the colour pink, which yeah, kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies, but there you go. And I want to end with another colour that's sort of taking us back in the direction of purple, which is the colour puce. Now, what colour do you think puce is?
Very light brown with slightly pink tinges.
Okay.
That's just off the top of my head because that's the best reaction in this circumstance, isn't it?
Well, here are some alleged puces. And again, depends who you ask, but it is a sort of brownish, pinkish, purpley colour. And it's another one with a really interesting history of why it's called that and what's going on with puce. People sometimes mistake it and say that puce is a sort of soupy pea green colour. Probably that's just because somewhere along the line they've mistaken puce and puke to give a sort of yellowy green. What's even more annoying again is that in the time of Shakespeare, not only were there two meanings of pink, one of which is pink and the other is yellowy green, there is puce, there is also puke. In Shakespeare's time, you could talk about something being puke coloured, but it doesn't mean yellowy green. We don't really know what colour it means. Shakespeare uses the term puke stocking, and we know that it's a dark colour, but we don't actually know whether it's sort of dark grey or dark brown or dark blue or just black. So yes, puke is black, puke is not yellowy, puce is pink. So
Joke with that puke colour not have bits of orange in it for the diced carrot that's always present.
well, I mean, was carrot a big thing back then? Yeah, it probably was. So except back in Shakespeare's time.
I know what you're going to say, they were purple.
Yes. Back in Shakespeare's time, carrots were purple, by which we mean burgundy. Because if you've ever bought because you can now buy posh purple carrots, which are supposed to be purple, but they're actually, yes, the lovely colour of Anne's backdrop there. And yes, carrots were that colour or white until the late 17th century, which brings us back around to William of Orange, because the reason that orange carrots became popular, it is thought, is that at some point during William of Orange's reign, or just before perhaps, a mutant form of carrot came up in orange and they sold really, really, really well because that was, you know, being patriotic, and buying into the king's identity as William of Orange, and those spread to become the dominant kind of carrot. So yes, we are tying everything up together here. Very nice.
Yes. I wonder if they've heard of that in Northern Ireland.
Absolutely. The Orange men, I assume, eat lots and lots of carrots. So, puce. The word comes from the Latin for flea, pulex, via the French for flea, which is pulse, P-U-L-C-E, pulch. It is first seen in England in a magazine article in 1777, which says that couleur de puce, like flea colour, is, along with nut colour, the reigning winter taste. The fashionable lady in 1777, this winter, will be wearing the colour of nuts and the colour of fleas. And it's not the colour of the flea itself, so what's going on? Well, particularly if you go for that sort of slightly darker version, it's kind of the colour of that reddish stain you get on your fingers when you've squished the flea. And yeah, that seems to be literally what it is named for, but it's a bit more complicated than that, because if you look in the French, it is it's coincidental, but it is similar in sound, your pulse, to a pucelle, which is a maiden. And there are a lot of there are several other words involving maidenheads, which have a similar word involved. In French, if you have a flea in your ear, you are not being rebuked. You are feeling libidinous. In France, have a weird association with lust, because the word for flea and the word for maiden are similar. And yes, there is a bizarre 16th century erotic poem in French about wanting to be a flea, biting its way down the person's body, and down and down and down, perhaps only to have its desires and it crushed at the last moment. This is what the French think is erotic, apparently, in the 16th century. So yeah, puce is the colour of sex and blood, and it comes out this kind of weird brown, pink, purple, grey colour, which, yeah, just goes to show something, I imagine. Other than these things are all abstract concepts, and you know, for all I know, you're seeing a colour that I would call orange anyway. It's all made up. Yeah, pink and purple, a lot of different things going on there, and no clear dividing line between any of them. But I think, yes, opposite ends of the colour divide here, that would count as that. You can go blue violets and end up in a completely different place again, because of course, you know, violet is completely artificial in terms of our Richard of York gave battle in vain. Isaac Newton invented the idea that the spectrum has 7 colours in it. So he's messing around with prisms and splitting light and seeing what he gets. If you do that, you don't really get 7 colours. Violet isn't really a different visible shade. But Newton, of course, is a great mystic and alchemist and things like that, as well as being a scientist. He really wants there to be 7 colours because it'll work with all of his thinking. So he invents the colour violet. There you go. Right.
Wouldn't some people say that a colour is a social construct, though, Joe?
Well, absolutely. But if you look at the wavelengths of the light coming through, there are... white light contains sort of bits where there are more light and bits where there are less light. So when you look at it, you can sort of see bands, rather than a pure, entirely fuzzed, equally sort of diffused idea. You can see different bands in it. That there is not a violet band.
Okay.
We
maybe think of something else too. when people propose that we could all see different colours, I've just learned to call them by the same name, the counter arguments tend to go on about the immediate emotional impression that colours have. This is seen as a counter argument. We must be seeing the same colour because we react to that colour the same as other people.
Mm.
But your historical comparisons destroy that argument, don't they?
Yes, because culturally and historically, you don't necessarily make those arguments. Those are also culturally positioned.
Different colours have the different effects
The only
in
thing
different times and places.
The only thing I know of that is kind of universal is the order in which we come up with colours.
Yes.
In different societies, that every color comes up with culture comes up with something that's dark and something that's light to start with, and then adds in red as its next thing that it needs to know. And the dividing line between what it uses isn't necessarily dark and light as we know it, but it has two ideas, and then it splits off a third set of things, which broadly speaking go under red. And then it comes up with something that's green and yellow, and then it becomes a bit more piecemeal after that. And blue is generally one of the later ones, and as we've seen, orange and pink, because they are subsidiary colours, could be later still, or indeed not happen at all. And that's the only thing I believe that's kind of universal about how colour works. I have got a whole book on that kind of subject over there, but I haven't got around.
Right. My first encounter with geographical diversity in the meaning of colours was the early samurai films. I got to see people swishing around these swords, cutting people's heads off while wearing delightful girly colours.
Yes, different cultures.
That was my first encounter with this issue.
Whether pink and violet and stuff are suitable for men, it's yes, like whether they can wear makeup has varied over the years. Well, thank you very much for joining me for that. Not sure what and when will come next.
Oh,
I haven't got a lot on at the moment, so no doubt there'll be something.
May it be soon.
Near future. And hopefully until then, you'll be in the pink. And I don't know where purple comes into this. That's entirely up to you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye-bye,
much,
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you soon.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Gone.